In the early days of Star Rail, the design of the game made it so that when you were building a team, the distribution of skill points was something you had to really consider to make the most of your units. But nowadays, that doesn't quite feel like the case anymore. Out of the 6 characters we've gotten so far from version 3, it's really only the Herda who you might occasionally run into an issue with, seeing as everyone else is able to avoid the problem in their own unique ways. With it being over a year since our last truly skill point focused character, it doesn't seem like a coincidence either. While we've always had things like characters with enhanced attacks that don't use skill points and support units that generate more than they use, recent design trends have made it fairly clear that skill point oriented design has been changed to the point of no return, and we might not get another dedicated character for it ever again. This video is sponsored by Opera GX. Just like how games are able to pull you in with breathtaking environments, Opera GX allows you to create your own immersive browsing experience. By going to the GX store, you can choose from countless free mods to customize to your preferences. You can change your splash screen, background music, wallpaper, tab sounds, keyboard sounds, and more in just a few clicks. If you're someone who likes to stay tuned into a good story while you game, Opera GX provides an easy-to-use video pop-out feature that allows you to multitask all on a single screen. And to ensure nothing interrupts your gaming sessions, the browser has a built-in ad blocker ready for you to use. If you're skeptical about switching from your current browser, don't worry, because GX is equipped with an import tool that lets you instantly transfer all your favorite browser settings like history and bookmarks. If you rely on any Google Chrome extensions, those are all also compatible with Opera GX. If this interests you, use my link in the description to download Opera GX today. Thank you to Opera GX for supporting the channel. There have been 4 total characters in Star Rail that have specific skill point related abilities in their base kits. That's not a whole lot, but still was enough to suggest that we might have continued to get similar characters down the line, similarly to how follow-up attacks were introduced very early on, and then were gradually fleshed out as a team over time. Well, that didn't exactly turn out to be the case here, considering it's been over a year since the last edition with Sparkle, joining the likes of Preservation and DOT in the drought for new characters. To understand why the developers would shy away from designing more, we should re-familiarize ourselves with these 4 and how they aged. The first of her kind was Qingque, who can, if you're unlucky enough, use an indefinite amount of skill points to re-roll her tiles. She was a surprisingly potent damage dealer in the very early meta, and it helped a lot that she was free to acquire, with extremely powerful 4th and 6th Eidolons if you were able to get them. Though while she had a good run, it was pretty inevitable that she'd get quickly outclassed by newer damage dealers with more consistent mechanics. Depending on how kind the RNG was to you on a given day, you might not have been able to stack her attack buffs fully, or get her E4's follow-up, or even be able to launch her enhanced attack at all. To this day, I'll stand by the fact that she has one of the most creative kit designs in the entire game, but her successor in Spirit didn't take long to arrive, with the release of Danheng Imbiber Lune in 1.3. Having the ability to enhance his basic attack up to 3 times with 3 skill points consumed for massive blast damage, he played very differently from the other DPS units of that era. His design notably made him significantly more difficult to pair with the skill point needing support Bronya, who was uncontested as the strongest damage amplifier of early version 1, seeing as how every other DPS greatly benefited from her stat buffs and action advance. Although he could offset the need for skill points a bit thanks to his technique and ultimate, he very much relied on teammates to have enough. And that's where Hanya comes in. Gameplay wise, she unfortunately is one of the most forgettable characters in the game, even among the other version 1 4-stars. Debuting in the second half of 1.5, it was very clear that her role was to support Danheng IL or Qingque, seeing as her skill would apply a mark to a targeted enemy that when attacked would recover up to 2 skill points for the team. To this day, this remains as the only skill in the game that generates more SP than it uses. This was especially relevant looking at the roster of Harmony characters at the time, with the aforementioned Bronya, Yukong also needing them for her buff uptime, Asta having a bit more flexibility, but still greatly benefiting from skill uses to generate more stacks of attack buffs, and Tingyun being mostly positive, though less so when her skill is used on someone with action advance. This gave Hanya a clear and distinct niche within team compositions, in addition to the damage, attack, and speed buffs that she could provide. I don't think anyone doubted that Hanya would be power crept eventually, but we certainly didn't expect it to happen in the span of just a couple months. Sparkle came out in version 2.0 with several skill point oriented abilities. Her talent increased the max number of skill points the team could hold from 5 to 7, she immediately recovered 3 at the start of battle with her technique, her ultimate regenerated 4 more, and she was able to make good use of excess skill points with her damage buffing action advancing skill. With additional qualities like her 1-turn buff being extended to account for follow-up attackers, and her flexibility with her basic attacks bonus energy regen, Sparkle provided great damage and utility for a pretty wide range of DPS units. Well, it should be obvious that a limited 5-star would outclass a 4-star within the same niche, but even Ron May, who released prior in 1.6 and with less overlap, still exposed the major drawback in Hanya's design. Her skill point generation takes up such a large part of her kit's power budget, leaving the rest of her support capabilities to be rather lacking. Her skill's unique method of damage buffing when an ally attacks a marked enemy oddly excludes follow-up attacks, and in general is just a bit weirder to play around. The more pressing issue is that Hanya's ultimate is unfortunately single target with a high energy cost, so even though her skill is quite spammable due to it regenerating skill points, and she gets a tiny bit of extra energy from her skill, it's not a great ability overall, especially with the duration ticking down on the attacker's turn rather than Hanya's own. And unlike characters that can work well with others who share the same role, Hanya and Sparkle were never going to want to be on the same team because you'd never realistically need that many skill points for a single lineup. So Hanya's usefulness was very short-lived with the increasing flexibility and power of supports over time, and now that the power level has continued to rise even higher, history is basically bound to repeat itself with Sparkle. Her skill point-centric design is the direct cause of her having a lower damage ceiling when compared to newer 5-star Harmony units. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, of course, so long as her unique skill point capabilities can be taken advantage of. It's just that in the current state of the game, that simply doesn't happen. Memo sprites, the shiny new mechanic of version 3, lend themselves to mostly ignoring skill points as a mechanic. When a big portion of a character's usefulness comes from their memo sprite skills, which act on their own and never consume skill points, then yeah, that checks out. Admittedly, the 2 damage dealers we have right now don't make for the best examples, since Iglaya uses enhanced basic attacks which don't consume or recover skill points as a result of her very high speed, and Castris apparently doesn't need to use skill points because she consumes the team's HP, but look at Remembrance Trailblazer. Once they summon Mem at the start of battle, they can operate at near peak effectiveness using only basic attacks unless Mem somehow dies or really needs a heal. Their main utility of action advance and true damage is especially powerful in part because it's not directly tied to skill points. Although the sample size is small, Remembrance's implementation does seem to lean away from characters with high skill point demands, explaining the lack of focus on it in the short term. And we did also get Mighty, who is another character that quite literally cannot use skill points even if he wanted to due to his HP consumption. But even when we get a skill point hungry character like the Herda, who always wants to use her skill to get energy for her powerful ultimate, which fully action advances her and gives her an enhanced skill that still consumes SP, a support like Sparkle isn't necessary to run. And that's a direct result of nearly every support by this point being very skill point friendly due to how little they consume. Fu Xuan started the trend of a 3 self-turn duration buff for a skill basic infinite loop, and it's continued to be prominent ever since. Then we have the aforementioned Remembrance Trailblazer, Sunday, who isn't a skill point sink despite single target action advance supports being characterized by that as a downside, Aventurine, who can potentially provide infinite shields without ever touching the skill button, and secondary damage dealers that also generate more skill points than they use. It makes total sense that plenty of supportive type characters would be designed this way to allow them to flexibly pair with skill point hungry damage dealers, but when every single one of them is made this way, then it also creates an environment where teams are virtually never struggling for skill points, and every future support is expected to follow suit, further contributing to the trend. When it reaches that point, a specialized skill point producing support has significantly lower value because they sacrifice raw power for it, yet other characters more or less invalidate the need for that utility anyway. And it's not even a result of the lack of damage units who need a lot of skill points, because Danheng IL is totally runnable without Sparkle. You could definitely argue that Sunday is way too good at what he does, but a character like him was inevitably going to be introduced at some point. So now it's pretty clear why Don Honkai was the last character to be able to consume multiple skill points at a time, despite being over 1.5 years old by this point. For one, new characters put up insane damage numbers already without needing tons of SP, so in order to be competitive and worth pulling, a new DPS would have to go beyond that, further contributing to the power creep problem that players are already quite unsatisfied with. If said new character absolutely needs more skill points than what the meta supports already provide, then they'd more or less be tied to Sparkle as a pairing, which actually wouldn't be that out of the ordinary given some recent design trends, but also not something players exactly enjoy. To be a relevant release today within this archetype would seemingly require a lot of fine tuning to get exactly right, which just doesn't sound worth the effort. From what I could tell, skill point design has simply moved away from what it used to be, and I wouldn't be surprised if we never got more characters with heavily skill point oriented design again, but is that necessarily a bad thing? Skill points as a concept introduce a layer of complexity to the game with micro instances of decision making in combat, and also an extra thing to consider on the team building screen. It was one of the few things separating a player's active gameplay from running the game on auto, so you'd think the death of it is a fairly significant blow to the gameplay experience. Well, I think that is a valid criticism of the current direction of the game, and perhaps it would have made for a more fun and challenging experience if not every support was able to contribute skill points so easily. There are still other ways for Star Rail to have complexity in its gameplay. I'll admit Castris might not be the best example given that she's an anniversary character who was given plenty of special treatment, but Netherwing's possible alternative playstyles of detonating for upfront damage or staying alive to maintain a 20% all-type resistance shred serves as an example of how Star Rail is capable of dynamic gameplay design through its characters, factoring in different enemies and game modes as well, and Star Rail still is able to incorporate complexity if they put in the work. It might be very difficult due to the game's constant updates and gacha fueled monetization, but it's still possible. And skill points will still remain as a mechanic that can be further explored without the addition of new characters, with endgame modifiers or enemy effects, so it still can always become relevant again in that sense. In team building, there are still things to consider with different offered buffs and enemy matchups, but teams are feeling more strict in synergies than ever before, though that's a separate issue from skill points. The gradual change in skill point design has already happened whether you are a fan of it or not, and there really is no going back now. Subscribe for more Honkai Star Rail discussion videos, and as always, thanks for watching.